Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, June 25th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, and Sam Blum joining us today. Welcome to the pod, Sam.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for making some time. Sam, of course, covers the Angels for The Athletic, writes about the league as a whole sometimes as well, does a great job on that. We're going to talk a lot about the Angels today because we have a pretty good sense they're going to be sellers at the trade deadline. So that creates a lot of opportunities, creates a lot of fun topics to sort of pick through. And this is a team that's got a new manager, new for them, not new to baseball, in Ron Washington. And we want to start today just by asking you, as someone who's on this beat, what do you think the impact of Ron Washington has been on this club? I mean, they're 15 below 500, so it hasn't been winning a lot of games, but on a day-to-day basis, from a player development perspective, what kinds of differences are you seeing in the Ron Washington era?
Well, I heard somebody say the other day that they lead the league in team meetings and, extra work. And that's something, the second day of the season, they played one game this year in Baltimore. And then the second day of the season in 40-degree weather, they had a full team workout at the ballpark on that, on that off day. That's just kind of the tenor of the season. They're just doing a lot of extra work. I think that it's still up in the air just how much that is helping. I mean, they're a pretty overall sloppy team, make a lot of outs on the bases. That's something that they completely overhauled. I mean, the Angels last year were one of the teams that just didn't really choose to run very much, given who they had kind of on their roster at the time. And the roster makeup has changed a little bit, but not that much. And they're still running so they've changed everything. So they're basically just trying to be one of the fastest teams in the league with not a ton of success thus far. So I think what you're seeing is, a team that's maybe trying to change their identity. But overall, my biggest question with Ron Washington is what's the end game? Because he's on a 2-year contract. The GM, Perry Minasian's on a 1-year contract right now. A lot of these players are, like you mentioned at the top, are probably going to be available at the trade deadline. So, whatever, kind of position that they're in right now, or whatever things he may or may not be doing to help the organization moving forward, I just don't really know where it's all leading. I think that, part of the narrative that the Angels have, to some extent successfully sold for this year is that they are this young up and coming team that's akin to what we've seen from the Guardians or the Orioles or the Reds even, kind of before this year. And it's just not the case. They're, they just decided to not really spend in free agency and not really assist in their roster construction whatsoever heading into this year. And so, they're kind of left with some young players, many of whom have already kind of had a chance and not really succeeded. I mean, I think that there are 3 great players to build around in terms of Zach Neto, Logan O'Hoppe, and José Soriano right now. And I think everybody else right now, it's very much up in the air exactly where this whole thing is headed. So, He's done a good job, but to the extent that it matters, Wash has done, I think, a pretty good job. But to the extent that it matters, I don't really know. And, there's also been certain ththings he's done that's rubbed people the wrong way. Obviously, the Luis Guillorme bunt situation, which has kind of become an infamous part of the season, where they tried to do a squeeze play. And I think the thought process behind calling for the squeeze really didn't make any sense. But then also after the game saying that wasn't my fault, that was the Guillorme's fault. He threw him right under the bus. So really just a poorly handled situation. And I think, that's a concern probably for everybody who's kind of watching this is what's the line between accountability and just blaming players and the overall feel in that clubhouse when those types of things happen, I think, could possibly jeopardize where this is all headed. So there's been good and there's been bad, but I think to the extent that it matters, it's just very much I don't think it matters that much. I just think that they're going to just recycle through managers and GMs to the end of time until there's a new owner.
One thing that intrigues me though about Ron Washington though is I just saw him up close with Marcus Semien, and he really the two of them, and I think that's the key is the two of them did it. It wasn't just Ron's work; it was that Marcus Semien was willing to put in the work.
Oh yeah.
And together they made Marcus Semien into a shortstop when Semien probably never was a great shortstop, but they made him, for 6, 7, 8 years, he was a passable above average shortstop. And that was a lot of Ron Washington's doing. And I think I saw some of the same with Ozzie Albies in Atlanta. Where he just, would link up with a player. The player would be willing to do the work. It's funny to think that might not scale because not every player wants to do the same amount of work. I mean, I just figured in my head at some point, oh, maybe he's a good rebuilding, coach, like manager.
He might be.
But manager can't do that with every player. And the way that he's kind of trying to scale that, I think it sounds like meeting style, which I think most players are like, oh god damn, not another meeting,
I think you're probably on. I mean, he's really linked up well with Zach Neto. I mean, I think that is a pairing that really could pay some dividends for the Angels long term, because I don't think Zach Neto is going to go anywhere.
And I think he might have another level. Like, he's one of the few young players that may be you could develop into another level, I think.
Yeah, and he's one of the best defensive shortstops, I think, in baseball this year so far. So he's someone that is, I think, benefited from having Ron Washington there. He really seems to be coming into his, own, not just as a player, but kind of, with the team and his personality. So I agree with you that he's kind of fine. He finds guys that I think really want to be coached and want that. But then you're right. Like, in terms of the rebuilding, because you need more than Zach Neto, and you need more than
it's not just like turning one player.
It's close to 26 players. Yeah, it's possible, and I just don't. Where like the culture may be better, but the roster also needs to be better. Like, they've so many of the players on this team, and some have performed well, but a lot of them have come in, and I wrote the story about this. There was like 9, 10, 11 guys who have been in the big leagues so far this year who, have contemplated retirement in the last year. I mean, it just keeps happening.
On the Angels.
Yeah, they keep getting, and then the Angels keep finding them and bringing them up, like, and it's just like kind of the makeup of the team. And yeah, I mean, Kevin Pillar has done that, and he's done it to some really exciting, success. But then, then you also have a Nico Goodrum who comes in for a week and doesn't get a hit and then gets DFA'd again. Has been like DFA'd 3 times.
And what does adding PR to like the Dodgers or something makes some sense, but adding PR to this team is like, okay, like,
well, then you just need a body.
Yeah,
that's what this whole season's been.
Yeah,
just needing bodies, and it's like it's pretty obvious. And they didn't address the depth enough. And they didn't address the big league roster at all, really. I mean, they added some in the bullpen, but even the guys that were added in the bullpen have really not been very good. Adam Simber had a great first month and is now, not doing well at all. He's on the IL. Luis Garcia been up and down. Matt Moore up and down. Jose Cisnero injured, was quite bad.
They're not developing. I mean, I think that so much of this comes down to player development, right? Like, player development should turn you out some relievers every year, and they don't have any of their own guys that have come.
Ben Joyce would be the one, but
Ben Joyce, and then I guess Jose Suarez.
No, they just DFA'd him.
They just DFA'd him.
Yeah, he was with his 9 ERA could have become untenable. So if they were developing him, it wasn't going great.
Luis Garcia was a free agent. Hunter Strickland, free agent. Matt Moore, free agent. Adam Simber, free agent. Carlos Estevez, free agent. Roansy Contreras, waiver claim.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, so Griffin Canning, early-ish draft pick. Like, there's if you go to the rotation side, but to Eno's point, it is surprising to me. Well, it's not. It's a clear missing link in the organization. They cheap out in so many unusual ways. This is where it costs them. It's the lack of depth. It's having to go get veterans who pondered retirement or to overpay for relievers in free agency because they don't spend some money to do a better job scouting and developing those players
100%.
Along the way, right? 100%. And you'd think by now Arte Moreno would have picked up on that as an owner. Like, oh, I could actually save money if I do.
Or some GM would have given him the this is what we need to do. We need to do the stuff under the hood. Like somebody should have done. Maybe he hears that and he's like, I don't like that. Sounds like money.
Yeah, I mean I think it's hard to assess the job that Perry Minasian has done, but I also look at he's now in his 4th year, so there's not the development's not there. I mean, the drafts, you look at that, remember that 2021 infamous all-pitcher draft they had? I mean, 2 of those guys have debuted in the big leagues. They're both in the minor leagues now, and then there's not a single
Who were the guys that were from that draft?
What's that?
Who were the guys from the draft that made it?
Still Seth and Bachman who have debuted. And everybody else, there's not a single other player from that draft that's even in their own very poor top 30 prospects. So that's like a reflection of just like these drafts haven't really paid out for them at all. And they're not developing guys, and they're not really drafting well. And, I think there have been some hits in that draft. Like, Neto is a great example of a hit. I mean, I think Schanuel, jury's still out on that. how that will play out. But there's some, overall concerning trend lines in terms of his just ability to hit for power and to, develop other tools than his bat to ball. So yeah, I mean, I think that there are like a lot of reasons why you would say about Perry, man, it's impossible for him to do the job. And I think there's a lot of valid things that you would be able to kind of point to. Yeah, he's not been able to spend the way he probably would. He's not been able to make decisions at the trade deadline in the way that he might do them. But then, at the end of the day, the farm system is probably worse than it was, or, on par with where it was when he took over, and the major league roster itself is probably worse. Yeah. So I just, and then I also think, why are you putting your GM in a position where, he's on his last year of his contract? It's nobody ever. That's not a good position to be in as a GM. If you don't believe in him, fire him after the last season or extend him, but don't let him leave him out here to dry with a bad team.
We're watching a little bit of that in San Francisco play out, where they gave Farhan a 2-year extension when he had 1 year left, so you didn't have to answer any questions about it, and so that people didn't feel like he was a lame duck guy. But also, they don't want to extend him longer than that because they don't know if they trust him yet.
Yeah, so. And that's, I mean, man, we can talk about the Giants, but they shouldn't necessarily trust
right. Well, I think it's even worse with Minasian. At least with Farhan, like, he had a 107-win season, and he's done some innovative things, and he could maybe make the case to ownership. I think it'd be really hard for Perry Minasian to make the case to ownership right now that he's done a great job. But when do you pull the plug, and how far do you pull the plug is one of the questions I had for you. It's like, do you let him do the selling off, and do you let him do the selling off to the point where he's trading away Mike Trout, who people have put into a Giants uniform,
if you're going to make your
Taylor Ward, who's cheap for a couple of years? Like, how far do you think they'll go with it, or will it just be Kevin PR and Brandon Drury and Carlos Estevez and a new GM at the winter meetings?
I mean, listen, if you're going to have a GM, you have to just let him. This is the Angels' problem. If you're going to have a GM, the GM should be the one that makes these decisions.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're working with the owner to, pinpoint a strategy overall. But the GM should be the one who's overall making these these calls at the end of the day to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that they need a full overhaul. I mean, if they don't, I think the big question is how many of these guys who are in their arbitration stage are they going to be willing to trade? And now they lost one yesterday, and Patrick Sandoval is going to miss, possibly up until 2026 after, tearing his UCL. So that's a concern. I mean, Brandon Drury, you mentioned him. I don't know if he has any trade value at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
not even played this year.
It's a question of who has trade value. Does Luis Garcia have trade value? Does Miguel Sano have trade value? I have no idea.
I mean, Sano's, they won't even bring him up to they have him. They're kind of like manipulating his overall situation right now because they're he's healthy, but he's still in a rehab. I mean, Walden Washington actually said that, like, he's healthy. We don't have a spot for him right now, so he's like still in his rehab. So, I mean, I don't even really. I don't know. I look at this as they need to make a full scale change, and they need to trade Taylor Ward probably. You got to look at Luis Rengifo as a
Rengifo has value.
I think Joe Adell is one of those that is interesting in the sense that he's had a pretty bad season, but there's enough in there that I think teams would be intrigued by having him on their team. Maybe not like for a super high value, but
trade the guys around him and just play Adele all year and just
that's what they're doing now. I mean, he's playing every day, and just he started out real hot first month of the season, and then the last 6 weeks have just been like he's got like 10 hits, like 10. I mean,
Adele and Moniak, if you have them out in the same outfield, that's like get the worst plate discipline in baseball.
Oh yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And they're they show flashes. I mean, it's in there. Moniak had a good year last year, but would
you trade Detmers?
Detmers' value is at an all-time low right now. So I think that he's someone that has that potential to be, a 1 or a 2 in any rotation. And if you're trading him at kind of the lowest point when he's really struggled. That being said, I mean, I don't know really where this is all going for him because he's now in his 4th major league season and not, the ups and downs have been so significant that it's hard to feel like it's maybe gonna pay off at some point with him. So it's just a lot. Like they're kind of entering this trade deadline stage where not a lot of these guys have incredibly high value too, which is a concern. I think Tyler Anderson's a name that needs to go.
Ward probably has value. I mean, that's
Ward has value.
$4 million player that's under arbitration for 2 more years. He's a solid regular.
Yeah, and he could plug him in. I mean, you could plug him in anywhere, really. I'm sure
Right.
Like he'd be playing on almost every team in the big leagues. So I think that's and that's how you restart. I mean, that's like if you want to restart, which I think is necessary. If they keep these guys and just say, hey, we're gonna see what we can do next year, then it's no different than what happened this season. And I'm concerned. I would be concerned if I was an Angels fan if they keep these players. And as much as Angels fans maybe like Taylor Ward or like Luis Rengifo, and those are good players, or they like Tyler Anderson, guys who have performed for you this year. It's just not, what you need is to restart with guys that you have full control over for long periods of time that can develop into, major league players, maybe next year, maybe the year after. But it would be conceding that next season probably will not go your way. But at the same time,
that seems pretty obvious from now. Like, I mean, what would
it's not going to go your way anyway. That's the thing they don't realize. It would be a first for Arte in the sense that he goes into a season not trying to sell people on a competitive roster. And I don't know how that will play out. And I don't necessarily think it will happen because of that reason, because he just won't ever do that. But I've also never seen a fan base like the Angels that would be as willing to accept a rebuild. They would love to.
They'd probably be excited about that at this point. Something different.
Yeah, because they're Angels fans are excited about this. I think this fake story that the Angels are trying to selling people, which is that they're like this up and coming rebuilding club right now, which is not the case. This is what they do every September. They're starting it early.
It's really strange too. I mean, given the way they've handled Neto and Schanuel and just pushing those guys through the minors as quickly as they have. I think Neto has 3 times as many plate appearances or 3 times as many games played with the Angels that he had in the minor leagues. That's how fast he moved this system.
I mean, that's the thing. What they did especially with Schanuel, I mean, the guy played like 40 minor league games, if not even 40.
I think it was less than that. It was even less.
Maybe like 14. And I'm like, that seemed like a very irresponsible thing to me. And to me, it still feels. I still wonder if him being in the major leagues right now is the right thing because, he's not performed that well, and I don't know if the ups and downs of dealing with he's in the middle of I think an 0 for 14, 0 for 15 slump. Like he's had some hot streaks, but then goes on these long slumps, and I don't know if there's a benefit to having a 22-year-old who's had almost no experience, even just using a wooden bat, like playing in the big leagues. I'm sure he'll get there at some point, but it's, he gets a lot of criticism, and which is fair because he's in the big leagues, because the Angels are subjecting him to that. If he's in the minor leagues and doing whatever he does, no one notices it. He's allowed to develop at his own pace and get to the big leagues when he's ready. And, you could say, yeah, I mean, he could step on a big league field and not embarrass himself and have a 640 OPS and, play mediocre to somewhat decent defense, but it doesn't really matter that. I mean, it doesn't really seem like the smart thing to me, but that's
his whole career seems to me that's going to swing on whether or not he can hit for power. And I'm not sure that's something that he's going to develop at the major league level. That is the one thing where I could see sending him back down, because hitting for power probably requires some mechanical changes, some approach changes, maybe even some training changes, maybe sometimes where like you can't play in the game because you're in the midst of some sort of training process. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, he needed time. Like he needed to not be called up.
But, he hits the ball. The hardest he's ever hit the ball is 103.9 is like Luis Arias, It's
and he's only hit one ball farther than 400 feet in his career. That was last weekend in San Francisco. I don't know if the wind dated or whatever, but I don't remember exactly. But it's he's not, playing in Anaheim is probably the best place for him to play in terms of the dimensions of the ballpark, because the power alley in right field is the shortest.
But that's just like, that's fake. That's not.
Yeah. But that's why he's 8 homers, right?
Yeah.
Like I think in most other ballparks, you probably have fewer.
Less, yeah.
So he's almost skews the power numbers a little bit since he doesn't have it right now. And his one experience with the wood bat league in college was not good. So he did not get the requisite time to prepare, and now he's in the big leagues and kind of being left out to dry in certain areas. I mean, he's probably performed better than I would have expected given the overall, just ridiculousness of calling up a player that quickly. But the Angels they drafted for a need. How often do teams do that? You draft because Jared Walsh.
I've heard people talking about that, like, in the clubhouse among the other writers and stuff. And I'm always like, yo, teams don't do that. Like, they're like, oh, why would they draft this guy? They have this guy. And I'm like, they don't care. Like, they just
you don't
want the guy
him,
to be good or not. They could trade him. They could trade the older guy. There's no teams don't normally do that. The Angels, yes, the all pitching draft was just like, we need pitchers. And like, Schanuel was like, we need a first
didn't even work. They didn't even work, right? Like it's
this is why teams don't do that, because they'd rather focus on just getting the best possible player without any sort of
plan here. There's no plan. It never was a plan. And I'm skeptical that any GM could come in here and establish some sort of concrete, like, this is how we're going to do it. But it certainly hasn't been Perry thus far. So at least one.
If all these guys,
if
all these guys get traded out, is there anything to look forward to? I mean, there's, if they do open up an outfield spot, or with Drury maybe an infield spot, is it just going to be like Sano coming up after a trade, or are there some young players that you can kind of circle?
I mean, they have some other players that could rush, but really they have I think two prospects that are at somewhat high level. I mean, Caden Dana is probably their best prospect right now. And even he, I think, is almost in an unfair situation because he's the best prospect. I think people expect him to be like the next Nolan Ryan or, whatever coming up. And it's just, he's probably a pretty decent big league starter in a rotation at some point in his career, but is he an ace? I don't know the answer to that. And I think that everyone kind of expects him to be that guy.
And is he ready at 20?
And he's 20 years old. And I think that the Angels have left the door open for, what we saw from Reed Detmers in 2021 when they made some trades at the deadline and called him up. I wouldn't be shocked if that's the way that this plays out. I don't know for sure that it will, but I think that's something you could see, especially since he's had a pretty good year in AA, very, very good year in AA.
Yeah.
The other guy, and I don't think he'll get called up, like Nelson Rada is only 18 or 19 maybe at this point. So he's another high level prospect for them that I think would be a pretty good prospect in any organization, but. Beyond that,
he's not really hitting for power, and he's
got like 1 homer, I think. Yeah, he's got no power yet. I mean, I'm sure he'll grow into that to some extent. But at AA, it's tough to, at that age to be really hitting home runs. I just, I don't think that there's many other guys that are gonna get people excited. I mean, Kyron Paris has been up a few times and not performed necessarily yet. He was really, this is to give you an idea of where the Angels were. Like, they called up Kyron Paris, who was hitting 091 in AA to be on the big league team. So that's where they were at.
It's interesting that Paris's line at AAA is all right. Is that where he went back to after? Yeah. So AAA might have worse pitching than AA.
Probably, especially in that altitude.
Oh yeah, and then the altitude is helping him. But then B, he kind of went back to AAA after seeing Major League pitching and probably was like, "This is a little bit easier."
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to rule anything out with Kyron Paris. I mean, I just think it's kind of almost like the Caden Dana situation where it's like you have some guys that like in other organizations, I think some of these guys would, be able to develop a little bit more obscurity. But with the Angels, they don't have anybody else, so this is who people get excited about. I'm sure we'll see those guys. I'm sure we'll at least see Kyron Paris back up at the big league level this year at some point.
There's still a lot of questions about him, like in terms of power, in terms of strikeouts.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions. He sees the ball well, he takes walks and stuff like that. But you're right, the swing and miss, the power. I mean, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions with everything here. I don't really think that there's. I mean, I imagine if they're calling guys up later in the year, it's probably more of the. Oh, there's Jake Marisnick at AAA still, so they can, fill a hole. That's what I think is more likely.
Right, like the Sano thing, right? Like
like Sano.
Got a guy. We're gonna give him a shot.
Yeah, we need bodies out there.
Play the string out.
Well, I think there's a chance they're going to draft someone at 8 that's going to play in the big leagues again at the end of this season, regardless of the fate of this team. I think Keith Law's latest mock draft had Hagen Smith, the lefty from Arkansas, going there. I don't think you should put more innings on his arm necessarily, especially in a starting role. They got to be careful.
That's the other thing. I mean, they always say like we don't care about that stuff. Like like Sam Bachman, I think pitched. I recall correctly when after he got drafted, and people were like, "Why?" because a lot of teams don't do that, especially
sometimes they draft him and then that's the end of him for the year. They can like hang out, they can work out, but they don't play.
Or they'll have minimal innings in like Arizona or whatever. But no, I mean, there's guys who are like Sam Bachman was like called up to Double-A, and look what's happened. I mean, he cannot stay healthy. They pushed him last year and he's now not healthy. I don't know if that's a correlated thing, or if he's just injury prone, but regardless, a lot of bad decisions were made. So yeah, I think it's possible, as Derek said, that they're going to draft someone at number 8, and then they're going to look to call him up, and they maybe will go below slot or something like that to try to, have more options later on in the draft. They've done that, I think, the last couple of years.
It's not really exciting to me. I mean, you feel like you'd want to get the highest upside guy at 8. And what's also weird is like, if it is Perry doing it, like, he's going to be like, oh, let's get somebody who can help right away. My job's on the line. Got to get somebody in here.
Make me look better. I mean, maybe
probably the best decision for this team. Another thing that's just weird for me, just we mentioned a couple of times the Arte Moreno factor, and that's obviously, behind a lot of this, but he put the team up for sale. Like, run me through that. Like, he just didn't get the offer he wanted, or he thought it would be. Was it a temper tantrum? Like, some part of it read like a temper tantrum. Like, I don't even understand what happened.
Theories that I don't know how responsible they'd be to share on it. I could give you like the outline of those theories. Well, one, I think the timing's important. All I'm going to do is lay out the timeline, and maybe people can make their own inferences based on it. But this came in August of 2022. We had kind of been told that there was like a couple months of discussions went into it. And if you kind of rewind a couple months, that was when the land deal fell through with the stadium. And a lot of legal, the story didn't ever really go too national, but it was a very fascinating story with the Anaheim mayor getting indicted and,
and that was Artie's boy or something.
Well, I mean, there was this idea that and I don't want to misquote exactly how everything went down, but that was who he was already had done a deal with, or the Angels had done a deal with the Anaheim mayor, basically, that the city council eventually decided was not done properly, and so the deal fell through. And as a result, part of there was an FBI investigation, and the Anaheim mayor was indicted, and all this stuff happened. So I don't know if there's any.
I missed some of these details, dude. Yeah. Like, I missed some of this. I remember the land deal. I don't remember that's how it went down. That's amazing. So he was just trying to get a sweetheart deal on buying the land from the city around it, like the parking lots and stuff. Or
it seems that way. So I don't know if there's any correlation there. I'm not saying that there is. But
has he started making noise about needing a new stadium?
No. But there's not been any commitment that they're going to like re-up this lease,
which goes to when?
Like I think 2038, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. All right.
So there's some time, but also, I mean, when you're talking about stadiums and stuff like that, that's not a lot. That's not that much time, especially if there's a possibility of leaving the stadium or moving it, and whatever it might be. So, and especially when you're talking about an owner who's 77 years old and has no successor in place and no real plan to sell the team. So I think that
there's no Moreno Juniors that are going to run the team into the ground like they did the Angelos Juniors.
There is no Morenos Juniors who are interested in. There are Moreno's children, but they do not want the team. So can't blame them.
Can you imagine being the child of a professional sports franchise owner and having this mindset of, I don't want that. I just don't want to deal with that. That sounds like a lot of work.
That's just not baseball, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I could just like have somebody be like, "You want my team?"
Yeah, of course. Even if it's a disaster, I'll take it. I'll happily try to do something fun with it.
But Artie's story was that he just like loves baseball and just wants to, got cold feet or whatever. Or just wants to. I roll my eyes at that. I don't. Yeah. I think there's just got to be things in the dynamic that changed that caused him to want to, keep the team off the market. And, I don't know why. I mean, what I don't get is, why do you want this team? He doesn't seem to want to spend on it. Doesn't seem to want to like make it any good. I guess
I don't know if that's true. I mean, like the Pujols and Rendon deals like had his kind of fingerprints on it. And I think that
he hasn't done anything since then. And that's what I'm saying. Like since he pulled back on the selling the team, like what is the purpose. I mean, I definitely agree with you that in years past, he's like, at the very least, done things that would suggest he wants to win, but that has not been the case the last couple of years since he decided to keep the team on, off the market. So what is it that you're keeping it for? Because you're not trying to win. It's just all you're doing is getting public ridicule, which is more than fair. I mean, he was in that, their pregame montage, and they got booed on opening night and then pulled himself from the video because that's just like, what are you doing? The fans here want him gone. I think if the A's weren't as much of a disaster as they have been,
there'd be more
the White Sox weren't even worse than the Angels in terms of the way that they're running their franchise, I think Arte would be getting way more publicity for how bad this is all going and how ridiculous all the decisions that he's made have kind of played out. So, there's so much there's so much like covering for Arte, and I just think there's no way to defend some of this stuff, and I don't understand why he still wants to own this team. And he won't come out and say really anything, at least not to me, only to the OC Register. So whatever.
So we haven't talked about Trout, and he's hurt right now, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think about the big picture because he signed the mega deal. He signed through 2030. It doesn't seem like Mike Trout is the type of person who will publicly insist on leaving. At the same time, like, how long is Mike Trout going to be content to play out the back half of his career in a place where the chances of winning are amazingly close to zero? I mean, they had Trout and Shohei Ohtani and got nowhere, which is just unbelievable in terms of the talent and the output just being so far out of alignment. The success did not follow the quality of those two players. So what's the end game for Trout, given the nature of that deal and who he is and the uncertainty around who might even be running this franchise a year or two from now?
I think if Trout wanted to leave, or if he wanted this franchise to be better, there are things that he should have done by now that he hasn't. If he wanted to make the Angels more competitive, he came out in spring training and said he wished they would sign some more free agents, and they didn't. But I think that he's waited so long to be critical of and he's loyal and he cares and he wants to win here. But at some point he needed, I think, to use his voice a little bit more to say, and his credibility with everybody to say, hey, like, this isn't good enough. And he just never did. I've been there for 3 years now, literally 3 years today. And it's like, I've never for so many times I've asked him, what do you think about the direction? And he just kind of cops out and says like, oh, we got some good young players, this and that. And it's like, okay. So,
what if he was just like buying cause players aren't always the best GMs. I'm not trying to say he's dumb. I'm just saying that, like, maybe he was, hey, we got Ohtani. We've got, Detmers look awesome. I talked to players.
I think he's uncontroversial. I don't think he's like a very smart baseball mind, in my opinion, who sees the stuff and is understanding of it. But I just think he does not want to deal with criticism and controversy at any point.
So it's like it's more like a Jeter thing, like where Jeter wouldn't really give you a quote about anything because
I think that's probably
wanted to be Teflon. He just wants to be Teflon. That's
probably a fair comp here. Yeah. And he's not come out and said, hey, like, and he doesn't need to be a GM. He doesn't need to say we need to get this guy or this guy or this guy. What he needed to do is be like, we need more. Like, we just need you. We need the focus to be on winning right now. And I don't feel like it is. I feel like if he said that at any point in the last several years, this might be a whole different conversation. As it relates to being traded, I think it's very similar. Like, if he wanted to get traded, I think the ship has sailed on that. I mean, who's going to take on his contract? He's been out now for
like half paid down or something.
Even that. I mean, he's now gone on 8 weeks since tearing his meniscus, and there's not even like a sign of him running it. This is what every
you were reporting on that. Why? Where was that? Where did that come from? Like, he just thinks it's within the realm of normal. It's just, this is slow.
Well, it's just like every injury for him is like turning out to be like this. I mean, last year with his broken hamate, guys come back from that a lot quicker. He came back for one game, but otherwise he missed half the season with the broken hamate. So that was anomalous to that injury. The calf strain in 2021. I mean, that was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks in the middle of May. Didn't play the whole year. So he's just. I think that with Mike, there's a couple of things. He does not like playing unless he's fully 100%. Yeah. He has seen what his talent can be like, and he doesn't want to play in anything that compromises that. And I think it's also accepting maybe that there are some limitations with his age. And, I just don't, this is the guy who's been known as the kid. This is a guy who's been known as like the youthful face of baseball. And now I think he's having a hard time accepting the reality that like that time is probably past him, and that his prime maybe is past him. So, what can he be now? How can he? I think that maybe will require him to DH more when he gets back, play corner outfield more, like that keep him healthy, preserve his health, so that way he can be a productive hitter is the most important thing for the Angels right now.
So you don't even think this will change? Like I feel like with Ohtani, you can tell yourself. My point with that was like you can tell yourself we got the two best players in the game. Especially if you're Trout and you're still counting yourself as the best player in the game, right? Like, so you say we had two best players in the game. We got this guy. We got this guy. I feel like you can't tell yourself that about next year's team.
No, I mean, I don't think there's anybody on this roster right now that's gonna be a top 20 player next year.
Right.
Right.
So but you still don't think it's gonna change for him where he's like, I'm tired of someone out.
I mean, I think my point is less that it's possible he might say that or he might feel that way, but I don't really see the recourse for that to change. Even if he were wanted, I think the only route for him to have gotten traded this year is if he were really good and the team were really bad, which actually the first month of the season seemed like that was kind of going in that direction. Yeah. But, I just have a hard time believing that somebody's going to want to take on years of Mike Trout at $35 million a year, and with this significant risk of him getting hurt and then being out a prolonged period of time while he is hurt. And it's a tragic way to go to kind of whittle down his career, because he is probably at his peak the greatest hitter of all time, or one of the greatest hitters of all time. But the greatest players overall. But it's like it's a sad thought to think that he's going to be just on this bad ball.
I think you might be right. We like to do things like this and put players on teams. And, if you look at actually what's happened in terms of moving money, you could move Eric Hosmer in the last year of his deal. You can't even move Eric Hosmer at like $18 million a year, with 3 years left. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that pales pretty much in comparison to Mike Trout. I mean, we're talking.
The name Mike Trout might be enough for a team just to be like, we got Mike Trout on our team. And, maybe we could maybe he'll be reinvigorated or want to be here. And
I mean, it would be something like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it'd be 6 years and $190 million, $200 million.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could get half of that paid down and you're paying $100 million for 6 years.
You're still not giving up a lot of talent to do that. No, it's going to be relative to what you would need as a franchise, what the Angels need. It's only going to be one small step in the direction you need to go to get better in the long run.
Well, the other team, they'd be
like, trading away your franchise icon too. So
yeah,
I just don't see it happening.
And unproductive potentially.
I don't see it happening. I just don't. And I honestly don't know if he wants to be traded. He doesn't seem to want to go.
He's in semi-retirement phase now.
I mean, I don't know what's happening with him. I find it odd that he's just like these recoveries consistently take so long.
He's been hanging out with Rendon too much.
I mean, Rendon's also been out now for quite a while, and he's making some progress.
Was it a hamstring strain?
Yeah, he said he tore his hamstring or whatever, and he's been out since like early April. Or mid-April.
Oh, well, if he tore it, I guess a strain is a tear, so it's always just a question of degrees.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like it was a somewhat significant one, but I mean, again, I never know with him. I almost like try to avoid it. It's like all the chaos of it. I mean, the big thing with Rendon is like, is he really going to keep doing this? I mean, is he going to do this till that money's done? I mean, he really does not seem to want to be there. So
it doesn't seem like he needs the money anymore either. And he's kind of talked about having more important things in his life. So at some point he could just walk away, but it's a lot of money to walk away from.
We've seen with Strasburg that it gets a little awkward because the team's like, sure, if you let us not pay some of that, you can retire or leave or whatever, Remember how Strasburg came and was like, yeah, I'm retiring. And then they were like, yeah, we're not going to pay you. And he's like, oh, hey, I'm not retiring. What's
yeah, I mean, and that was someone who was the Nats and Strasburg. Like this, I don't even really. I mean, the Angels and Rendon are like just. It's like they're there together because it's like contractually obligated, but they're not. There's no like history there. There's no success there. There's not even like a basis of, cordiality there. I mean,
They're going to DFA him.
At some
point.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't think they're going to DFA him because it's like, I mean, maybe the last year of his deal they would.
Yeah.
They did something similar with like Justin Upton and Albert Pujols and stuff like that. But he's not even like a distraction almost, like at this point. Like he's just,
he's not around.
He just shows. I don't think like his teammates I think teammates like him to some extent. I don't think he's like a bad guy to have around necessarily. It just doesn't add anything. And it's like, you don't add anything. You're getting paid $38 million. He wakes up every day and there's another $250,000 in his bank account. And that's not, he's earned that. I mean, I don't think anybody who's making major league money, they've earned that. So I don't want to like belittle it, but at the same time, like he's not playing anymore and he's not earning it further. And, some of that's bad luck with injuries and some of it I feel like is just, or if there's anything, I mean, I think he's just lost benefit of the doubt for everyone believing that, he's
trying hard to get back.
He's trying his best and he's trying his hardest. He may well be, but I don't think he's earned that, default mindset
from his comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So at the beginning, you were talking about the core for this Angels team. You mentioned José Soriano's name. And of course, in fantasy circles, he has been noticed over the course of this season. I think the Angels have a bit of a problem with Soriano that's not completely unique from what the White Sox are dealing with Garrett Crochet, and that they have this guy who's a great pitcher who has an extensive injury history that I think other teams would be pretty interested in. And you have to kind of decide in the front office, say, okay, we like this guy, but are we going to be good while he is still healthy and good? Or does he help us actually get somewhere? I don't think the return will be anywhere close to what the White Sox could get in a Garrett Crochet trade. But I do think José Soriano is very interesting. So what have you seen from him so far this year? And what kind of ceiling do you think Soriano has?
I think he's got a really high ceiling. I think he's a really, really elite starting pitcher, to be honest with you. And yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because you're right. He's currently on the IL. I don't anticipate, it's just with an infection, so I don't anticipate it being like a super long thing. And that it could, I mean, if it does get longer, maybe that could play a role in terms of like how a team might value him. I think one of the other questions with value with him is that he's never pitched more than like 80 innings in any professional season. And right now he's kind of like already bordering on that. So how much can he give you down the stretch of the season is a big question. So, could he pitch in the playoffs? Like, I think you'd want to have him, if you were to trade for him this year, you'd want to have him available to pitch in the postseason. And then at that point, you might be really, really pushing him. And the Angels are a franchise that doesn't seem to really care about pushing guys beyond maybe what they should be. But I think other teams would be like, that's a huge risk, especially considering he's had 2 Tommy John surgeries already. So to answer your question, I mean, I think that I'd be a little surprised if they traded him because I just don't think they would get that value back that they maybe see him being worth. But yeah, I mean, they also need to just restart. I personally think if you're restarting, he's someone you build around. And I think O'Hoppe and Neto are the other 2 guys. And I think everybody else at that point is either fair game or, just you keep him, you leave him. It doesn't really matter that much. But I like those 3 players, and I think that they're kind of like those building blocks, and maybe Reed Detmers too. But it's just not clicking for him so far.
Has said it before. I think 3 is a core. 3 can be a core. I don't know if those 3 can be a franchise core, but I do think you're right. Those are the building blocks that you are anticipating being there for a while. Yeah.
And they could be a core if you're turning out decent guys and you're buying good players in free agency. And if you look at other teams in the past, like if you look at like even the Astros that won it all, like, and you try to be like, who's the young core? You end up getting around 4 guys or whatever.
And I look like the Rangers, like what the Rangers did is not that complicated. I mean, they were really bad in 2020 and 2021.
And they knew they had a bunch of kids coming up.
Yeah. And they went and spent
a bunch
superstars.
And they did better spending, I think, than the A's did. They bought better players.
Yeah.
Although they had a lot on the IL themselves.
Yeah, they knew they had a plan in place, and they knew the timeline of when that plan would kind of come to fruition. And obviously they're not having a great year this year, but there's a championship team in there. So
and the key, I think, was just knowing like that they had the capability of developing at least bats. Yeah. And so they were like, if somebody goes down, we've got Young, we've got Who's the guy who plays everywhere?
Duran.
Yeah, Ezekiel Duran. It's not somebody you get super excited about and say Ezekiel Duran is part of our core, but you're like, oh, we're happy we have Ezekiel Duran when Corey Seager goes down or whatever, you know? So the Angels don't have any of that. They're not like, oh yeah, when they pull somebody up, it's somebody who's drafted last year.
That's why I'm just like, I roll my eyes at this, this whole, like, the kids are playing and this is the young, it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's a nice idea. It's a nice thought. And I guess you're playing young players, but that's not like by design.
It's kind of like the Rockies said, like, we want to be like the Rays. And you're like,
yeah. This is like the Angels saying we want to be like the Orioles.
Yeah. Like, okay. It totally looks like the Orioles to me.
Yeah. It's
Jokes on us if they all take another step forward and it looks good next year. But I just
even if all these guys were to take another step forward, I don't think they would. Still don't think they'd be good.
They're 15 below 500 on June 25th. So would they be 8 below 500 if everyone took a small step forward?
Yeah. 100%. That would be at maximum. I think that's what we're talking about. And not a lot of these guys have. So it's some of them have taken steps back this year. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can go the other way as well. Sam, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate all your time and your insight. Where can people follow you on Twitter?
Follow me at Sam Blum 3 on Twitter, please. I appreciate you having me on. And read the articles and
anything in the works coming up that you want to pimp.
But God, it's going through such a weird editing process. I don't even want to talk about it.
Just wait.
Just wait.
It's going to be great when it gets out.
Refreshing the
page. You've done some great stories this year off the Angels beat and on the Angels beat. So thanks for coming by.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys. I'll talk to you later.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. If you want to subscribe to The Athletic, you can do that at theathletic.com/Rates and Barrels. Find Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. Find me at Derek Van Riper. Find the pod at Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.